Welcome, everyone, to episode number 62 of Chatting with Nuts. And I wanted to start off this episode by thanking our first ever sponsor for Chatting with Nuts, and that is Whatnot. And Whatnot is a live streaming shopping app for pretty much anything you could imagine, but I personally use it all the time for books. And it seems like their booksellers are expanding. I've been able to get some really, really good stuff off there, like Glenn Cook's Black Company mass market paperbacks that are signed for cheaper than what they were when they were first released, which was a pretty great deal. And I was excited about it. But Whatnot is very much like this YouTube Live and also a bit like eBay, as I've already mentioned, the auctioning piece of it. So you can see what you're buying, interact with people who you're actually buying from. And it's a lot of fun. It's very interactive. There's giveaways, really quick auctions, and there's even a marketplace to shop for books. So if you can't be there live to do the books or auctions not exactly your thing, there's other ways to go about purchasing what you want for very, very good deals. And I wanted to mention this tonight, not just because they're a sponsor, but because two friends of the channel are going to be hosting auctions. They're going to have some really interesting items that I think my audience would be very compelled to check out. And the first one is actually 2 days from now. It is on September 24th, 2023, 4 p.m. Eastern time. And that's going to be Moyd over at Media Death Cult. And he's going to have a live stream auction that's going to feature some really cool sci-fi collectibles and editions. And this is all going to be under free shipping from the UK, which is really awesome. And then other friend of the channel, Bridger from the Library Ladder, one of my favorite guests, is also going to be hosting a stream October 15th at 4 p.m. And he's going to have some absurd, rare, collectible fantasy editions, and not all of them are out there to break the bank. I think there's going to be some great deals there. So if you want to check out all that stuff, I have both of those auctions linked down below in the description. And there is a referral code that you can use in the description that does help the channel, and you will get $15 credit that you can use on those auctions or anywhere else on the Whatnot site. Even if you don't want to do books, there's plenty of other stuff on there as well. So if you sign up to that, you will get $15 and it will support the channel. And I want to thank Whatnot so much for sponsoring tonight's stream. And with all that said and the bills paid, tonight's guest for episode number 62 of Chatting with Nuts is a man that I have talked to a ton, but not ever in voice before tonight. But I already feel like we kind of know each other. And that is my friend, Alexander Darwin, who is the author of the Combat Codes. Alexander, how are you doing tonight, my friend?
Hello. Hey, Jimmy. I'm doing well.
Good to see you.
How are you?
I'm all right. Hey, man, I'm
great. This is great.
Yeah, this is a long time coming. I feel like we should have done this a while ago because me and you first started chatting years ago.
Way back in the self-published days, which actually wasn't that long ago. But yeah, we've been chatting for a while, so this is exciting. And as I told you before we got on here, this is like me going out. This is the dad / book nerd version of getting out of the house here in my office. This is where I do jiu-jitsu. So it's my place, my sanctuary.
Yes, I absolutely love that. What you said before we went live, you said it's you're going on. I said, yeah, it's like the book nerd equivalent of going out on a Friday night. Yeah. And, I'm sure the audience probably has their drinks and other, substances ready, which is always
everyone listening. Go do it. Go party. Let's do it.
I almost thought about cracking a bottle of wine, but I was like, we better, we got a traditionally published author in the building. We got to really button up here.
That's where things go downhill, man. You know how authors are when they get together. It's all downhill from here.
I think, we should tell people how we started interacting, which was essentially you were a black belt in jiu-jitsu. You had written a self-pub fantasy book and you were looking for people to check it out. And we ended up interacting on Twitter. And it turns out that not only are you really good at jiu-jitsu, but you're really good at writing. And you were maybe my second ever self-published book I've ever read, I'm pretty sure, from back in the day. And I loved the cover of the original Combat Codes. Still one of my favorites.
Felix Ortiz. I'm a big fan of his. He's been killing it. I've been, actually he lives close to me. We've gotten a drink before. He's a great guy. Oh. Outside of being a fantastic artist, Felix Ortiz is a really cool guy, and we've hung out before. He's got kids, and he moved to Massachusetts where I am. So yeah, plug on Felix if you guys need. I mean, he's pretty in demand now. It's hard to get him, but if you can, you're lucky.
Yeah, he is a talented guy. Is he a big reader of the genre as well, or does he stick to pretty much just drawing the pictures?
He reads here and there, but he actually he has a martial arts connection too. I know me and you, we both do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but Felix practices Muay Thai, kickboxing, Thai kickboxing. Yeah, so he was a natural fit for the cover artist for the self-pub version.
That's awesome. I love that. So he definitely understood the vibe you were going for. Did you spar him? Did you butt scoot towards him? Did this
No,
happen?
man, my Muay Thai, I did Muay Thai for about 5 or 6 years, and I just don't like getting hit in the head. And it's probably good. The writing probably would not have come out as well if I took too many concussive hits. I don't think it's good for the brain.
It's not good for much, honestly.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe you Imanari roll, heel hook, put him out for 9 months, that kind.
I just like what wrestling with pajamas, as they say.
Yes, that is absolutely what it is. I've been out from Chatting with Nuts. Usually this show's every 2 weeks, but I've been out for about a month. And in that month, I was telling you prior to we went live, getting MRSA, not recommended, folks.
Yeah, that's gnarly. Recommend. That is gnarly, man. I'm glad you look great. It looks like you're back, doing your thing. So yeah, that's not. We all know how bad. For people that aren't familiar with it, hospital. That's some life-threatening stuff. So I'm glad you're okay.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I got it and I kind of was like, okay, like first time I've ever had it. But in grappling, it's very common for those who are listening. It's not like all that unheard of to get staph or ringworm turns into staph or something from grappling and being on the mats. But I did not expect it to be so disruptive to my life. I was in a wedding and I was on crutches at the time because it was affecting my hip so bad. And, I ended up taking an extra Motrin. I took a shot of tequila and I walked down the aisle for my friend because I didn't want to put crutches in his ceremony. And I got to tell you, man, it felt like my WrestleMania moment all over again. I was like, look,
I'm sure he appreciated you doing that.
He did. I got a big round of applause at the end. Everyone was like, dude, that was awesome. I'm like, I still got it. I still got it. Oh, man. We actually have somebody saying that they picked up the combat codes because the cover caught their eye, which I thought was awesome. And Meth Palumbo, fantastic name, says,
hey,
I bought the
thank
combat
you, Meth.
Yeah, thanks, Meth. Never 2 words I never thought I'd say. But he says, what I found was a story I absolutely love. No spoilers, but I love Zigo and Murray and can't wait for Grievar's blood. And that makes me so happy because the one thing that I really enjoyed about the combat codes is that I felt like you were doing something very different from the rest of the genre, which is one of the strengths when it comes to self-published for sure, which is where you started. And that's what I want when I read self-published is I want new stuff. I want new ideas. I want stuff that maybe breaks the marketing norms that we see in the genre, and also just having the martial arts background in it was literally like attending a jiu-jitsu seminar. I told that to some of my friends because I got a couple guys at the gym to read the book as well. I was lending out my signed copy that you sent me, but now I'm like, this isn't the canon version. You got to go buy the new version now.
Yeah, you got to hold on to those self-published copies. But I think self-pub does have some massive advantages as far as being able to write what you want, and that's what I wanted to write at the time, and I was passionate about it, and I'm glad that that's the route I went. Even though now we're doing the trad pub thing, I'm proud of those roots, and I know how it is with self-pub authors, so I really both admire that way of publishing as well as think there's a lot of advantage. You can pivot. It's a lot more nimble in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's a changing landscape. It almost feels like weekly I see new things coming out, and then Kickstarter obviously has been a really big avenue for a lot of people. But for you did start out self-pub, and you had this story in mind. Did you know it was going to be a trilogy from the get-go?
No. I'm more of a bit of a discovery writer, and I've tried to outline, and it's maybe you never know. I think it's kind of a good thing, and also the bane of my existence being writing the way I do, because you end up writing yourself in the corners, but it's just the way I do it. My brain doesn't seem to, when I outline it kind of takes the juice out of it. It takes the wind out of my sails when I outline a bit too much, and I find it makes it a little bit less fun for me. And at the end of the day, when I'm having fun writing, that's where I do my best writing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did not plan it on being a trilogy, but luckily it ended up working out where I could expand it into a trilogy.
And did you know from the get-go this is something that you wanted to, try to go get published or self-publish or show other people? Or did it start off kind of like a pet project? I'm always very curious about this because some people will start putting the pen to the paper with no intention of sharing it. And then all of a sudden, it blossoms into something.
Yeah. So I did right around when I started learning about KDP and, the Amazon ecosystem really. And I was living in San Francisco, and I was kind of in the tech startup sector. And so
cool.
that side of it was all very interesting to me. Just the ability. And people ask me, like, did you want a trad pub or did you want a self pub? I didn't even know about trad pub. Like, you think people know, you don't really know. Most people don't know about that process until they do the research. Like most, normal people
Yeah.
don't have the problems we do. Like, not weird people like us. They don't know what really, like, trad pub doesn't mean anything. Like self pub and trad pub doesn't. It's just all one thing. So I really found self publishing first and thought, wow, this is pretty cool. This technology is cool. You can get a book out. You can do all the print on demand and marketing. So that's kind of the path I took, and I didn't really learn about getting an agent and pitching to editors until way later.
And did you have someone kind of guiding you through that process, or did you have to, do the good old fashioned way and Google it?
Yeah, no, all I didn't have anyone guiding me. I just kind of learned it all, and that was, for me, to be honest, that was fun. At that point, I was really having fun learning about the various platforms, learning KDP, learning. It was all really fun to me, and kind of, again, that's what I always say. It's like eventually when you get into it, it's like running your own business, and I found that at that point where I was with my personal life, my career, all of that, that was really a cool thing for me, being able to run my own businesses, find artists like Felix, be able to have that relationship with them, find contractors that were editors, copy editors. That was really a fun part of it. It's kind of like entrepreneurship in a way. I think self-published authors, when they do it right, they really are entrepreneurs. And again, I was coming from that startup background in Silicon Valley, and that was kind of where my brain was at. So at that point in my life, it was all pre having my first kid. That was where it was at.
Yeah. And whenever you work in a startup, because I've done that as well in the tech sector, being a programmer, it's like you can see from cradle to grave kind of thing, right? Like you can build this thing up and take advantage of like all, like you said, technology that's around you. And it's pretty empowering in a lot of ways. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the combat codes whenever I was reading is that I could tell that you took time to edit. Specifically copy editor. I mean, there are times, you see that in traditionally published as well, but self-pub, there are less guardrails at times just because there's less eyes on it, right? And I immediately could tell that you had taken time to do the editing and to do everything, what I would consider to be the most proper way of getting a story out there. So that was pretty excellent. When did you start writing the story? Was it many years ago?
A while ago. I think it was like 2014, maybe a little before that. 2014, 2013 is when I first started drafting that. And, I did have a lot of help from just some friends that were, beta readers. I think that's super important. I think for most self-pub authors, especially when they're starting out, beta readers are real. And you know what? Traditional published authors, self-published authors, you hear they have the same beta readers and they stick with them for so many years, like big names. They have the same writing group, and that's so important. But I think especially for a self-pub author, a beta reader is serving as your developmental editor. Like, now I have my editor at Orbit. That is what your beta reader doing. And so I am so grateful to my original beta readers, because some of them, were coming from academic backgrounds in writing, and they had, the chops to, grade papers. And they really, really helped. Like the story, as so many people say, was completely different in those first few drafts. So I really did spend a lot of time carving that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go to your beta readers and you get the feedback, have you ever had them? I'm always curious about this because I don't know much about beta readers, but like, is there ever any arguments where you're like, I think you're off base here?
Yeah, I'm sure authors have that. I mean, I've always been the type of person where I think one of my skills is I'm good at accepting, feedback. Even it might come, to be honest, it might come from like jujitsu. As training a martial art like jujitsu, you can't really bullshit very much.
Nope.
It's
You
not
sure
like
can.
if you're doing something wrong when you first start out, you get smashed and you get choked, and you get armbarred, and it's kind of like it's a no BS test. And I think that mentality really has given me a lot of value, not only for writing, but for everything else I do, where I'm like, if I'm doing something wrong, I want to know it. I want to know other people's opinions. So I've come to that. And I think I've also been very lucky I've been fortunate enough to have beta readers that are really good at what they do. And I think there is an art to giving constructive feedback, and knowing what's going to be helpful and what's not, and what's your thing and what's going to be more of something for a larger reader base. I think I did luck out on having good beta readers that gave really good feedback.
Yeah, I think that is definitely one of the most important things in any art form that you're looking to improve at, is having people that are going to be honest with you and focus on the right things. And it is interesting coming from like something like jujitsu, because you're right. Like a lot of things in life, you can fake it till you make it. And that is certainly not the case with really any true martial art, especially jujitsu. And whenever you are in a position, or you're trying to get to a position in jiu-jitsu and learn these techniques and things, there's no shortcuts. Like there's nothing there that you can do, and it does take a long time. And then it's interesting, like you leave that environment and then you go to sharpen another skill, and you realize that many people are willing to work with you with gloves. They don't want to offend you or say the wrong thing. And it's just like, I think having that mentality and that expectation that you are going to be wrong and that you are going to have things to work on does lend itself to being better at other things. And I was going to ask you, working on the craft of jiu-jitsu, working on the craft of writing, like how those things meet in your brain.
Yeah, actually, I think they sync up in a more practical way than you'd think, not even like metaphorical or um, I actually use jujitsu because it like it puts my brain in a place where I can write. Like it calms my brain down and like makes it so there's not so much in there. If it's a very eloquent way of saying it, clearly I'm a writer. But it puts me in a place almost like a meditative state after I'm in a very good place after I do jiu-jitsu, where I can be creative.
Yeah.
It kind of gets rid of all the thought, the processing, the worries, planning of the future, and worrying about the past. And so, like right after I train, I hop in the shower and I will try to write. That's like a really nice. If I can, it's hard nowadays to find the exact right time with actual full-time work as well as having family. But that would be the ideal time if I were to have my way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, once someone's trying to strangle you, all the little things in life tend to not stress you out as much.
Right.
And
Right.
you come out of it in this like relaxed Zen state of like, I survived, and that's amazing.
Right. And it actually makes you like I feel friendly and like loving towards the world because I don't have any aggression at that point. I
agree.
recommend it. I highly recommend it.
I agree. I've been testy over these last few weeks. I've been able to go to jiu-jitsu.
I know.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, my wife tells me to go to jiu-jitsu when I'm grumpy. Like, get out of here. Don't play with your friends.
It is my favorite mood enhancer, for sure. And I totally know what you mean. I have some of my best times coming up with video ideas or like maybe the way to review something post jujitsu. I mean, it really does help. So that makes total sense to me. I mean, maybe to no one else watching because they don't roll around in the pajamas,
Right.
but
But I know there's equivalents, and like jujitsu is special in its own way. But like in general, I think exercise for me is a good way to
Mhm.
clear my mind. And I like also just for like practical reasons, like being able to get out of your chair. And I think writers deal with
Yeah.
these like issues that many people do, where you're sitting too long, and you want to be able to stay healthy and keep. I know actually one writer that talks a lot about this that I've followed for a while is Murakami, Haruki Murakami,
Yeah.
who I'm a big fan of his work. And he actually has a few books that I highly recommend for writers on writing, much like Stephen King or Ray Bradbury's books, which I also recommend.
Yeah.
But his are very interesting because he's a very interesting kind of weird guy, and he talks about running. He's been a lifelong runner, and how it has a direct correlation. His exercise, his running has a direct correlation on his writing, and he like totally credits his entire career to being a runner, which is like it kind of makes a lot of sense to me. But I highly recommend. I think he has a book called Running and Writing, something to that effect.
Yeah, Joanna says I want to read Murakami's book about running and writing, so maybe that is the title of it. And I was actually going to
Yeah.
ask you
What is the
about
name
like,
of it? Here, I'm going to find it for you.
yeah, go for it.
Just so
Hit up the
people can.
Googles.
Murakami running book. Um, it's called "What I Talk About When I Talk About Running." It's really good. If you're an author, it just makes like some of these authors' books are as far as writing are so prescriptive. I don't think they're helpful. They're very like prescriptive. Like this is how you create a
I couldn't
narrative.
agree more.
And his book is just like all of his work is like way out there, and it's like, but that's what you need as a writer. It's like it's tapping into something creative that's beyond the actual prescription for how to be a writer.
I love that so much. And I was actually going to ask you, like, resources that you use to get into the craft, whether it be like Steering the Craft by Le Guin or On Writing by King, and then obviously this Murakami book. But the prescription thing is so important. And I think that Brandon Sanderson's lectures from BYU are incredibly useful. However, there were times where I felt like he was saying what can and can't be done. And he is talking from the commercial perspective, which is
right.
Definitely a consideration, and it depends on your goals and such. But I remember him saying that like second person is experimental, like you don't really do that. And I'm like, why not? Like N.K. Jemisin did it, and sure, it might grate some readers, like it's gonna grate the masses possibly. But if that is the voice in which your story needs to be told, then that's how you tell your story. I'm not a big fan of saying you can't do this. Like I hate that.
I agree, and I understand that. I watched all those lectures, and they've been very helpful. Yeah. They've been very helpful, but mainly from a commercial. Like he does such a good. He was the first one that I ever found that talked about publishing, that talked about getting an agent. He was actually the one that when I was actually learning about that educated me on all of that, the publishing industry. But I agree with you as far as being prescriptive from a creative end, it feels very constraining.
Yeah, and I want people to use that creativity. As someone who sucks being creative, I'm in awe and wonder of people who can come up with these things. For instance, I really enjoy your fighting, like the stage of it all, without getting into spoilers, having different effects. Like that was so cool. I would have never thought of that. I would have been like, we're good enough in the cage, bro. Like that's great. And then you took it, you added your flavor to it, which I loved. I thought that was so great. So when I see people flexing those type of things, which sounds like Murakami is a really good example of this, I love that. That's always great.
Yeah, I mean, if you've read any of his stuff, it's really, some of it's really out there. It's great. It's great though. And I like reading his stuff that's nonfiction about his life. That's almost the stuff that's more interesting to me. As far as those the in the combat codes, I give myself some credit, but actually, reality and having a lived experience and watching martial arts, that's kind of the inspiration for that. Like I don't know if you've ever been to a UFC event, or of course you've watched a lot of UFC, or any sporting event, but I've always been very interested in like how the crowd affects an athlete. And like having competed myself, not very much, but like I know for a fact that I'm a terrible competitor. And like how I perform in the gym versus in a competition setting is far worse, because like I'm like, who's watching me? Like, is my family watching me? Like, and you're like, people get in your head. It's like, you know, I think good athletes, you know, they must seriously have a way to kind of dispel that or just get used to it. So that was kind of the inspiration for having like a magic system, you know, where different kind of arenas would affect, you know, fighters differently.
Oh, I love that. And there's no better example of this than the Apex era of the UFC, specifically with no crowd. That was a very strange time in mixed martial
Very
arts
strange,
history.
yeah.
I mean, you can hear every hit. You can hear the corners' advice. They're interacting with each other. I mean, it's almost like a sparring situation, but money's on the line. I mean, it's really crazy
Right.
stuff.
No, that was awkward. Or back in the day, Pride. So I don't I don't know how many viewers, or
Yeah.
even non-mixed martial arts fans, like if
New
you ever
Japan
watch
Pro Wrestling.
the old days of Pride fighting, it was, you would have an arena of like 150,000 people, and the Japanese fans were so respectful of martial arts that there's no booing, there's no cheering. You would just hear like respectful cheers when like there's a very technical exchange. They would, like, UFC fans are just screaming for blood. They're like, get them up. Like, they just want to see people get knocked out. But like Pride back in those days, that's like, maybe I'm getting old, but that's really the heyday, in my opinion, of martial arts.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the Pride walkouts were the jam. And honestly, that's what Combat Codes like took me back to, you know, because Japan has I'm sorry, folks. We'll talk about books in a second, but Japan has a very tight relationship between mixed martial arts and professional wrestling that I think enhances both of these things. Whereas America, it was always very much like one or the other. Now that's changing now with the TKO merger of UFC, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But I always thought that Pride did a wonderful job of showcasing the talent and actually booking the talent, to where some of the personalities that we would see in Pride would have larger than life gimmicks. I mean, the Axe Murder, Vanderlei Silva versus Mirko Crow Cop, right leg hospital, left leg cemetery. I mean, that's pro wrestling 101.
But at the same time, these are real people, and that's amazing that there was
real killers.
There's a Croatian enforcer who would literally, his job with the Croatian military would be to kick down doors so that people could raid a building. This guy became a fighter, and he literally had a phrase that said left leg hospital, or was it right leg hospital,
left leg
cemetery, and he would literally kick people in the head and completely knock them out. It was amazing.
And then you have the stoic Russian.
I'm getting
I love it
here, Jimmy.
Listen, Alexander, I've been yelling at these people for 4 years about MMA and pro wrestling, and they all just are like, just when is he going to stop? So to have someone actually feeding into this feels very validating, honestly.
Yeah. No, and it's from a storytelling perspective, that whole era for me is very interesting. Like, there was the whole Yakuza mafia that was behind the scenes, which is like, you hear so many stories about fighters that were like, would have some Yakuza enforcer that would give them a little talk before the fight and be like, oh, that's a little dicey.
Well, it's not all good over there still. So in pro wrestling, the Yakuza was very much involved, and that is I don't know if it's exactly the Yakuza, but there's relevant issues like that still today for people.
No, I'm sure I mean, with sumo, which is the national sport in Japan, I know that is a big, that has been a big thing. Yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Is there going to be a Yakuza stand-in in the Combat Codes second trilogy?
Yeah.
I'm just giving.
There may be a future story that involves that sort of thing, but maybe not with the Combat Codes.
Fantastic. I love it. Yeah, but the pride, the larger than life, the arena, and just like the vibe of it all, I felt that in the Combat Codes. And actually, also, interestingly enough, I also did think of sumo, because sumo also has an atmosphere that is unrivaled. And
I've never seen a match. I've always wanted to go to a real sumo match. And there's a show on Netflix, which I've been trying to convince my wife to watch, but I've done a terrible job, because I've been like, it's a show about sumo. And she's like, okay. But there's a show on Netflix called Sanctuary, which is supposed to be really good. and I need to catch it. It's gotten really great reviews, and it's like about the sumo culture.
Yeah,
It's not. It's fiction. It's not nonfiction. It's fiction.
Yeah, it's kind of like Warrior or whatever that one show was, the MMA show that was on, I think, HBO.
That show's. I can't tell you enough about that. I mean, that Warrior show is fantastic. 3 seasons.
I've heard it's great.
Yeah, if anyone hasn't seen that, that's a really good show. And not just it's not just martial arts. There's like incredible storylines. It's like the backdrop in the early 1900s San Francisco. It's incredible.
That sounds right up. I'm gonna check it out. I know my in-laws liked it, and they don't get like anytime we were at a beach house last year, and I put on a UFC event because it was like Saturday and nothing was going on, and they're just like cringing at it. You know what I mean? Like, this is barbaric, and but they loved that show. So
yeah,
you don't have to be.
My wife does not like violence that much, but she actually managed to watch that show because the storylines are so good. Like the characters are so well developed.
Yeah. So do you take inspiration? You take inspiration from a lot of places, but like, for instance, television shows. Like, are there television shows when you were sitting down to write your book that you thought about?
Nothing like consciously where I was like, I'm taking from this. And I think that's just how it works. I think for most authors, most creatives, it's more just like subconscious. So I'm sure all of the plethora of shows that I was watching at the time kind of seeped into it. And I've always been, martial arts fans, all the, I can't even remember what I was watching. And then, live martial art, mixed martial arts as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And pulling those in and making a product like this is definitely unique in the landscape of what we have as far as to select from. I'm wondering if you will set a bigger trend of maybe seeing, because also mixed martial arts is becoming a lot more popular in the West. The UFC is now here to stay, I would say, at this point, and people know actual fighters, which is crazy to me. But I'm wondering if maybe we'll see some more MMA inspired fantasy. Do you know of any others?
So, So like I used to be, I still am a fan. There's an author, and he goes way back. He's like kind of his name is Barry Eisler, and he doesn't write sci-fi fantasy. He writes like thrillers. He's kind of like the Tom Clancy of, but with like a martial arts spin in a way. And he also is like a judo black belt, and he's big. Like he's been around since like maybe the early 90s. And he has a series that's been going on and on and on about, it's called like, the main character's named John Rain. He's like an assassin in Japan, and he uses a lot of martial arts. They actually, Keanu Reeves was going to play him for a while, which would have been awesome. But I do recommend that if you're into like that kind of thriller, assassin thriller with like a martial arts. So that's one I've thought of. Fonda Lee, who's also a martial artist, has written a bunch of, obviously most people know of her from the Greenbone saga, which has a bunch of more like kung fu type of martial arts, and that's her background, kung fu. And I know she's done, I've talked with her, and she's done some Brazilian jiu-jitsu too, but she wrote a book before that called Zero Boxer, which has like a bunch of martial arts in zero gravity, which is really cool. Really
that is neat. Yeah, I would definitely check that out. I feel like there's room for more, but out of the ones I've read that have had martial arts, like Greenbone, for instance, I do think that you do it very, very well. And when I gave it to my guys at the gym, they're like, dude, like, that's a really proper way of describing an armbar. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's like a free jiu-jitsu seminar as you're reading the book. It's tremendous.
Well, the thing that really surprised me, and the new version with Orbit, the martial arts, I don't want to say were dumbed down, but we did make it a little bit more palatable to a wider audience. But end of the day, I think it would have been fine either way. And the thing that really surprises me and makes me so happy, obviously I love when martial artists pick it up, and it's kind of like they have an inside peek into the magic system that is the book. But there have been a ton of people that have no interest in martial arts at all, no interest in even like military fantasy or anything similar, and they've really taken to the book, and that makes me really, really happy. And some of the things they've said is that I've always said is like, it's almost like a magic system. So like if you went into Mistborn and you didn't know about what is the magic system?
Allomancy.
Allomancy, yeah. Allomancy or sympathy in Name of the Wind. Like if you didn't know about it, you wouldn't be like, I don't know about this system. I can't learn this. It's like people will kind of learn some of the stuff as they go along, and that's how it's treated in the book.
I really like that. And I was going to ask you how important that would be for you in going into a traditionally published, arena and keeping those things. But it sounds like you were able to put it in a manner where, yeah, you softened it up a little bit, but it ends up being more digestible to the readers, because I mean, you really did give some amazing instructions for the armbar. I was so impressed by that, man. I loved it. Curtis 7 has a question, and I love this question. It says, does unrealistic combat in movies, TV, books, etc. bother you?
That's a great question, Curtis. Thank you for that. So yes and no. So I have been that person, especially when I'm watching something with my wife, where she'll be like, "Can you just be quiet? Like, you need to stop." So I'm not absolving myself of doing that. But at the same time, I feel like if a story is really well told, I'm able to suspend my disbelief, and that's really the key. So like if you have it doesn't matter if it's unrealistic, if it's in a magical setting, or if it's Star Wars, which is lightsabers and the Force. As long as you can make me from a viewer or reader perspective suspend my disbelief, then it doesn't matter if it's realistic or not. But if it's in a world that's supposedly supposed to be realistic, like if I'm watching like Jack Ryan, and Jack Ryan chokes someone unconscious, and then that person is supposedly dead, and they don't bother him, and he goes on to the next bad guy, and that person that he just choked unconscious is not standing up and being like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" That kind of bothers me, because it's like you've created a world that's supposedly realistic, and yet you're breaking these rules. Like that would never happen. Like as Jimmy knows, if someone is choked unconscious, like 5 seconds, they'll go unconscious, and then they'll stand back up in 10 seconds, and they'll wonder where they are, and it'll be confusing, and then they'll be back to normal. So yeah, that's my take on it.
For me, the thing I hate, I read in books all the time from some of my favorite authors, but like KO to the back of the head, they've been knocked out for 8 hours apparently. Now they're in a dungeon and all these things, and I'm like, if folks, if you get knocked out and you are unconscious for 8 hours, you're dead. You're dead or brain dead, or have such severe CTE that you make Anthony Hernandez look like a good guy. Like there's just no way that happens, and it's not massive brain trauma.
Right.
Dude. And the problem is that a lot of people use that to cut the black at the end of their chapters.
It's a great tool. I understand from a writer's perspective for both strangulation as well as knockout. It's a great tool because that bad guy is now out of your scene. It's not a problem anymore. But yeah.
That's me being pretentious, I guess, about certain. I'm not an expert in many areas, and I don't even know if I'm an expert in jiu-jitsu, but I like to be able to apply some of the knowledge that I've crammed into this gigantic head of mine from time to time.
Right, and again, it's about the world. I love when authors or writers or storytellers create worlds where it can be in our world. Like Kill Bill is the perfect example for me, where Kill Bill theoretically takes place in our world. Like they're in Tokyo, they're in New York or whatever, yet they are just dropped these little things in it. Like they're on the plane with the samurai swords. Everyone has a samurai sword. And just those little things that an author or writer can do can allow a viewer to suspend disbelief, to then say, oh, wow, there's this 5-point palm exploding heart technique. And that's actually real. And I believe it, because guess what? We're in a world where the bride is this masterful samurai, and that's wonderful. That I just think the way that certain stories can be told that way, it's not like it has to be in a secondary world, it has to be in a fantasy world. You can create stories in our world where it doesn't have to have realistic combat. You can make combat fully unrealistic. You just have to be able to create that world.
Yeah, it's part of the fictional dream that John Gardner talks about in his book Art of Fiction, and talks about, you're responsible as the author to be able to suspend that belief and put them into the fictional dream, and anything that pulls them out of it is a negative, and that is bad, and that goes against what your ultimate goal is. And to go down a path of something like that is a big risk, but I think if you're good enough at the craft that you're going to be able to do it. And that just shows you, writing is so difficult and painful, even at times. I would argue, at least in the little limited times that I have tried. With you, the cool thing about you, so I've interviewed like Tad Williams, Erickson, like these people who are towards, they're veterans. They've been around for decades. They probably can't remember the first time that they finished that novel, that they put into the drawer and never released or whatever. But you are still so fresh, like you're still learning,
A
you're
blue belt.
growing. Yeah, and
I'm a blue belt.
exactly. You're a blue belt. That is a great analogy. I love it. So I was excited to have you on because a lot of people aspire to be writers. A lot of people run into roadblocks, and I want to know what was the big aha moment for you in your process, and maybe just some things that helped you out. Erickson had a phenomenal quote where he said, you need to murder the inner critic. You have to murder it. That way you can get through it. And I always ask authors, like, how did you murder your inner critic?
No, I think I think that is a really big part of it. Murdering the inner critic, what Erickson said, as you that I think that's the thing that most new authors struggle with, is as they first start drafting, whatever it might be. It could be short fiction, could be a novel, poetry. It doesn't matter. They're thinking about readers immediately. They're thinking about someone reading what they're writing, and I think it's almost like you don't even need to take it to the level of murdering your inner critic, like something that extreme. I would just, for what really helped for me was just writing for myself. And again, that sounds kind of cliche, but just writing something that I was enjoying putting together and being able to move forward from paragraph to paragraph, chapter to chapter, without constantly thinking about someone then reading it.
Yeah.
I think I know every author has a different process, but a lot of them are talking about what they do after years and years of writing and putting
Yes.
out many novels. And I know some of them, some authors I've listened to say that, they still go back after a paragraph and make sure it's perfect. That's fine. But I think for most people, especially brand new authors, that's going to be detrimental. That's just my opinion. I know for me it was, making sure every paragraph is completely perfect. I think that for a new author, I think that can be debilitating, because that just points to not removing that reader's voice from your head while you're writing. For me, just making the move to being able to keep drafting, and knowing that I'm going to come back to it for a future draft and be able to improve upon it, and knowing that all my favorite authors who I've read probably wrote shitty first drafts, and we know a lot. I know I write really shitty first drafts, and I think that's something that people that first get into it don't understand. It's something that I didn't understand, is that there's a process of chiseling the marble to make the statue. It's like you have this amorphous blob, and it doesn't look anything like the story you wanted to. The characters are they're all the same. All their voices sound the same. You don't even know the world doesn't make sense. Doesn't make logical sense. There's so many holes in it. That's okay. You got to just get to it and get it finished, and then come back and persevere and make it better the next draft. And you'll know if you want to keep moving forward. Like, just complete it. I think that's really the most important part.
Yeah, I think completing something and finishing something is a skill in itself. And Stephen King very much talks about that first draft is just getting it on the paper, but it's also writing with the door closed and kind of writing for yourself, writing that story. That story comes first, and then you open the door, and then you invite in other eyes and then other perspectives that maybe you should be thinking about as you're working on this story. And that sounds like pretty solid. I mean, it sounds very similar to the process of which you're following.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, including myself, when they think about being an author, they think about writing, it's almost like this vague idea of a lifestyle. Like you picture yourself at a coffee shop with your mocha, and you have your cool fancy typewriter or whatever it might be, and you're kind of listening to your favorite soundtrack, and it's all just so nice. And we all have that picture, and I
Mhm.
understand that, and that's great again, but that's not what it is, right? We all
Yes.
know that's not what it is. It's you're in the shit. You're stepping through the field of shit.
That is very much like coding.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. And
I
you
taught
just
myself
gotta
how to.
keep going. And you're grinding, and you're hitting the wall, and nothing makes sense, and you just gotta keep going.
Yeah, I think you have to fall in love with at least parts of the process. There's always gonna be things you don't enjoy about it. That's the same with YouTube. I mean, there's things I absolutely adore about doing this stuff, and there's things that I loathe about doing this stuff. But as the whole process comes together and it finishes, there is a sense of accomplishment in that. And that's with anything that's hard to do. And anything that's worth doing is probably difficult at some level. So that process is probably one, not just important to kind of embrace, but also to figure out your own process because everyone's so different. Did your process change at all when you went from self-pub to traditionally pubbed?
Yeah, I mean, the practicalities of how traditional publishing worked made the change inevitable as far as the way it worked. Just working with an editor, the many iterations with traditional publication. There's just so many more iterations. Once you hand in that first draft, there's like it's not just like copy edit, developmental edits and copy edits. It's like developmental edits number one, then number two, and then copy edits number one, number two, and then there's like first pass, second pass, third pass, and it's just like so that that was the process that changed. As far as the way I write, I don't think that's changed. I'm just writing the same way,
Mhm.
and then it's just the relationships and dealing and working with collaborating with more people is really in a different relationship. With self pub, you're hiring contractors and you have a certain relationship with those people.
Yeah.
And then when you're working with an editorial team and you're working with a PR team, it's just a different relationship.
Do you feel like going into the traditionally published world lessened your stress? Maybe not the writing itself, but everything else that comes with that.
No, it did not.
Still
And
having
you know
a
what? It's hard to I'm not saying it's due to self-publishing versus traditionally publishing. Um, because there's a lot of variables in play here. Like I'm
Mhm.
in a different part of my life. I have stress for other reasons. Whether it be personal or career related or all that. So I'm just giving you the kind of pulse. I feel like my overall stress is not lessened. Definitely, I feel there is an element of stress that didn't exist with self-published because you're you have deadlines. That
Yeah. Yeah.
it comes down to that. And like I understand, like if you're a self pub author who's very successful and that's your career, you do have deadlines, and that is its own stress. And I never got to that point because and even now I still work a full time job. Um,
Mhm.
During self pub as well as traditional pub. But I know for a fact that the self pub authors that need to put out like several books a year, you're self imposing those deadlines. So that's its own kind of stress. But for me personally, the deadlines with traditional publishing is a new thing, and but no matter how you slice it, that creates a different level of stress.
Yeah.
So just different things to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, do you mind me asking what you do for a day job?
I have a small marketing business, but
Cool.
the marketing is fully unrelated to anything publishing. It's just like uh, you know other sort of businesses,
Cool. Very cool. Um,
and it allows me to have some freedom of schedule to be able to write. So
Yeah, excellent. I mean, that getting a job to enable whatever you really want to do is always the dream, right? Meth Palumbo had a good question, and I wanted to highlight it here. It says, "I'm a character first guy and love the characters in your story. My question is, was Murray based on anyone you know?"
Yeah, I think no, that's a great question. Thank you, Meth. Murray was kind of amalgamation between probably like movie characters, film characters, fighters, as well as people I know. I think the overall sentiment of an aging martial artist, an aging fighter who is not what they were in their heyday, having aching bones and getting up out of bed and having a back was almost self as Jimmy knows, if you do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I know we've been talking it up. It's a great sport. There's a lot of mental benefits. I recommend it highly, but having done it for 20 years, it's tough on your body. It's tough on your joints. And, you know, everyone gets older and who knows, everyone ends up with injuries and all that. But I just had this connection with Murray as far as feeling, you can't keep up with the, 20-year-old D1 wrestlers anymore. And
Oh
you just
God.
kind of, and the old adage from Lethal Weapon that Eddie Murphy says, I think we're too old for this shit. That definitely echoes in my head quite a bit. And all the many of the characters that I love are actually, especially recently, to be honest, kind of fill this trope of the lone wolf and cub. So the lone wolf character, I've always been really fond of the older, aging warrior who is protecting kind of a young disciple or a person that needs help. I've always liked that trope, that character. Yeah, Danny Glover. I said Eddie Murphy. Sorry, Danny Glover. Yes, you got it.
I also love the warrior that is over the hill or is going to give it one last shot. I don't know if you'll remember this, but I sent you a short story I wrote back. It's been a while, like 2 or 3 years.
I do remember it.
And I had a character that was an over the hill king who used to, he was Robert Baratheon. Let's be honest. He was Robert Baratheon from Game of Thrones. And it's just like about one last stand, like that's like my favorite trope in the world, that grizzled veteran. And that's why Murray was my favorite character, which I thought there were plenty of good ones in the cast, but Murray was definitely my personal favorite that you wrote.
Yeah. I mean, you can think of so many examples, like even it doesn't have to be someone that's over the hill, like The Witcher. Geralt, I think, is a good example, or even like the Mandalorian.
Yes,
they're not necessarily over the hill, but they're in charge of someone. But yeah, it's the type of characters that I gravitate towards. Are not always the top of their game. I find it more interesting when they've like almost, for example, I'm a big fan of Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. That's a really fun book. I really enjoy that book. And I think the main character is named Clay Cooper. I think that's a great example of just kind of an over. I mean, the whole band is over the hill. One of the reasons I really like that book.
Yeah, and also with them, they had a great dynamic between the band because it was not just a joyous reunion. There was a lot of like baggage from the decades that they had been together doing very tough things. And I think that's a pretty realistic thing. And a lot of times, one of the reasons why people end up kind of being reclusive later in life is maybe they don't like who they were when they were at the top. Because when you're at the top and you're in a physical type sport, you're usually not you're not approachable. We'll just say that. And whenever life humbles you, you have to deal with that, and then you have to deal with how you treated people. So I just think that those are like really interesting lanes to go down in storytelling. I think of Randy Couture, Randy Couture coming back, going to heavyweight, beating Tim Sylvia for the heavyweight belt, and you're like, we know Randy Couture is falling apart. He's 40, and he just won the heavyweight title because he just had enough in him, and he grinded you out. He had great dirty boxing. And that's what I think of when I think of an old grizzled veteran doing it one last time. I think of Randy Couture.
Yeah, I'm always rooting for the underdog, and especially if they're like past their prime. That's my jam.
Yeah, that is that, it's the absolute best. It's Rocky IV in a lot of ways as well,
Yep.
which is one of my favorite movies.
Right. Certainly those brains, I mean, those movies, having watched them so many times, are one of the things that have seeped into my subconscious. The
Yes,
Rocky, all the
yeah.
Rocky movies.
Oh, without a doubt. I think it seeped into every facet of my life along with pro wrestling. Just the show of it all. So I wanted to ask you, how did you get picked up by Orbit? Like, how did this all come about? Because, I was talking with you pretty much during the whole time you were self-published, and I did a cover reveal, and you finished up the trilogy, and, it was a sense of accomplishment, and it was out there and people were picking it up and it was gaining steam. But like, what led, to Orbit? Like, did they send you an email or?
So it's as many things go. It's a confluence of events, and that's what I always tell to people that are asking about, especially going the traditional publishing path, and whether there's one path. And I know there is a way that's prescribed, which is you write a manuscript and you submit it to an agent, and then the agent will then take you out in submission. And that is the way. I'm not knocking on that method, but there's so many authors that I've talked to, so many, and maybe it's just a bias based on these are the people that are talking because they have these stories that are out of the norm. But I feel like there's so many authors I've talked to that are not getting published by that traditional methodology of submitting a manuscript. So I think people should definitely think outside the box a little bit. But essentially the way that, so it all started with SPFBO, the self-published fantasy blog off, which Mark Lawrence, the author, runs. And it was the sixth iteration of that contest. And my book was fortunate enough to make it to the finals of that, which definitely opened, or rather gained it some, especially sci-fi fantasy readership, and really was a start to give it, more eyeballs outside of the martial arts world and kind of the smaller circle of people that had read it. So that contest really was the beginning. And again, there's so much luck that plays into, obviously, I had the product there, and I self-published it, and I put the work in, and I did the entrepreneurship thing, hired, Felix and all of that. But there is an element of luck, especially with SPFBO. It's like, which judging team are you going to get? And like, as we all know, books are a taste thing. So like, does the judging team, do they like your book? Right. It's not necessarily like there's good books, and it's not necessarily about the book being better than the other books that were submitted into that contest. It's just like, the judges in that team enjoyed my book, and then for the next round they liked it too, and I made it into the finals, which again got a lot of eyeballs on it. And it actually, so the next step was, it actually, a little bit further down the line, as I was releasing the second one, I got approached to option the book from a film company that was fairly big. That option has since lapsed, and I can't talk about things now, but we're into another iteration. But it was a big film company. It was a little bit unorthodox, and I essentially ended up, because of that option, getting a film agent prior to even getting a literary agent, which is very, again, backwards with a very large film agency, CAA, which is really a giant agency. I'm not with them anymore just because, again, other reasons, but it's just such a giant company that you don't, with a company that large, they don't really pay attention to you. But that led me to being able to getting it. I was like, well, now I have a film agent, but I don't have a literary agent, which is like backwards. So that led me to start submitting to get a literary agent with all that behind it, as far as having the option. So again, my query letters were not standard query letters, as far as like, there's a standard format that you're supposed to do this. I was using the option for leverage, being like, hey, this giant production company is now optioning it. Like, look at me. That's what you have to do when you're doing query letters, is really make yourself stand out from a bunch of many other manuscripts that agent, like, I don't know how many manuscripts agents read, but it's crazy. It's mind boggling how many they read. So I was able to get connected with my agent, actually through a friend, another author who sent my information his way. So again, in that case, like networking is, I think, undervalued in the author community. I think like people talk about going to conferences and all this, and if you want to, like, I think that part of it is really important. If you can make it, I know, and not everyone can make it, but I think that part of being an author, the networking part, meeting people, not only from the purpose of like meeting other authors, which is like incredible, being able to meet other authors and kind of form your social group, because it's such a solitary endeavor being an author, what you're actually doing. So I think that really can lift. Like for me, that was so important, meeting other authors and getting the group of finalists, which I'm still in contact with. I've gotten drinks with them in London, like the SPFBO finalists. I'm still like friends with them. So just having that crew was so important. And then, yeah, so I got, I'm with my literary agent now, Ed. He's fantastic. And then he submitted, and we got picked up by Orbit. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's again, it's like you can't prescribe this sort of thing, like we were talking about being prescriptive, but I would say for people that are just look at all your options. I mean, I'm not slapping down the traditional way of submitting manuscripts, because I'm sure there's a large percentage of authors that have come through that pathway, but I think there's a lot of ways to slice it.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking outside the box is usually never a bad thing. So that's incredible, dude. Getting a getting a film option on a self-published series maybe you're the first? Maybe?
No, I think I've heard of others, and now, especially with like the streaming era,
Oh yeah.
there's so, like, I mean, obviously we're in a writer's strike right now, so not right now, but like um over the past 10 years, I think as big streamers, there's so much content out there, so they're looking there. I think the
Mhm.
self-pub, and I'm sure there's been a lot of other self-pub authors. Typically, there again, the reason there hasn't been is because there is a traditional pathway where you get an agent, you publish your book with a traditional publisher, and then you have like the book to film part of your agency, and they submit to film companies. That's why self-publish has not. But I know for a fact that some of these production companies or writers or studios, they'll definitely be willing to look at whatever material is going to sell.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they want to move units. That's definitely
Right.
their goal at the end of the day. And
Right.
anything that has like an option or anything on that is obviously going to do very, very well. Uh, so I know a lot of I shouldn't say a lot of changes, but changes happened when you went from self pub into Orbit. And I'm just curious, as someone who's read the original trilogy that was self published, which now I feel like are collector's items, by the way. You can't get them anywhere. You got to go through Orbit now. So I got those beautiful Felix Ortizes on the shelves, but how much of this story has changed since moving the traditionally published? And for those maybe who are watching who did read it when it was self-published, what can they expect? Is it totally different or somewhat different?
Yeah, so I don't want to false advertise, especially for those that already like spent money on the first one. I'm not trying to be like, go buy both of them. That's silly. But each book in the trilogy has about 20% more
Wow.
uh, about 20,000 words, really. And that's something that was incredible for me, because usually you think about going to a traditional publisher and they want you to cut down an original manuscript, but they actually really wanted me to expand the world and characters, which is like a dream come true, because I've been living in this world for several years now, and like it's something I wanted. And in addition, I think I had like a real advantage, because I had not only the judges' critique from many rounds of SPFBO, but I had like Goodreads reviews, I had Amazon reviews, I had like YouTubers that had given me really good critique. And going back to being able to take critique, I like compiled all of that. I compiled all of the critiques. You have to throw some of it out. That's like, okay, that's taste. And then some of the praise you throw out too. That's taste. That's great. You compliment the book. That's taste. And then there's the middle ground where you're like, wow, that's really constructive feedback. And I took all of that and I applied it. And then I took my editorial feedback from Orbit and I applied it all to these new versions. So it's not, I don't want to say it's just cleaner. It's like, of course, there's more world building. I expand, like in the first book, I expanded Murray's storyline quite a bit. I felt like he didn't get enough airtime in the first book, especially the second half of the first book. So he definitely gets a lot more airtime. And then as far as the actual world building, I expanded a lot, you know, like more classes to kind of flesh out the magic system, and then also just some of the terminology. Like, if what I don't recommend is like reading the self-published version and then jumping to like book 2 of the traditionally published version, because you won't know what's going on. But that's not because the story is so different. It's because the terminology is very drastically different. It's like the names of like, for example, in the first book, the main nation that the fighters are being trained at is called Mercury. Now, when the audiobook, the self-pub audiobook came out, and the self-pub narrator did a fantastic job.
Very nice.
He really did a good job. He, of course, pronounced the nation Mercury, but what I didn't realize is, because that name, and it's spelled with an I in the book as opposed to the planet Mercury, a lot of listeners to the audiobook, it kind of gave them the impression this was like future Earth. And it's like almost like a Red Rising situation where like these people are on the planet Mercury that has somehow been like colonized, and it like changed their whole perspective of this world. In reality, the book is supposed to be like a galaxy far, far away, like a science fantasy world that's completely separate from ours. There's no, it's not it's ambiguous what it is, right? But it's that simple thing that threw a lot of people off. So it's like, okay, so all that is changed, like the names of the nation. Some character names, you know, too similar to this or that. A few of the like Easter eggs for jiu-jitsu fans where the names were too similar to like real people. We kind of got rid of those as well. So again, I don't recommend going from the self-pub first book to the traditionally published second book, because that will be confusing.
Good to know for people who've read the self-published version. And Vignesh wants to know, does the audio book of the books also updated as per the new contents added?
Yeah, Orbit has has an audio narrator that we vetted, so all the audio narration is updated for the new versions. And to be honest, I haven't listened to the new audiobook all the way through, just because, you know, I've read my book so many times, you basically don't want to read your own book anymore.
You're tired of it?
but I've heard that the audio, all the feedback I've gotten for the audio narrator, Donald Chang, is that he did a fantastic job on the new
Excellent. One. Excellent. Do you get any hand in picking your audiobook narrator?
Yeah, so it depends. If you're like a big name author, I'm sure you, like, if you're Pierce Brown, you get you're like, I want this guy.
Yeah.
But for you know, kind of a debut author like myself, the typical thing that Orbit does, at least, is they'll give you three options, and they'll have those narrators do auditions for you. So yeah, so you'll give some general feedback before that, and they'll give you the first chapter basically, and you'll pick from those three. And I haven't gone down the road where I've been like, no, I hate all three of those. Can you find someone else? I don't know what they would say. So I think they would kind of figure it out based on what you did. They might just be like, no, you got to pick one of those. But I found one, luckily, of those three that did that fit really well.
Yeah. I mean, that's at least interesting that they let people audition for you. I mean, I feel like you get to kind of be Simon Cowell at that point, right? And you sit in a panel.
Well, I don't have any interface with the narrator, but it was fun. It is.
They should change that. They should make it more brutal for the narrator. No, I'm just kidding.
Just make it like a live cast like this.
Yeah. You are the weakest link, or the weakest narrator, but that doesn't sound as good.
Like, I want Dave Bautista. And be like, no, I'm not taking no for an answer. Be like, get out of here.
You know, it's funny. I thought about Dave Bautista as Murray, because I struggle visualizing things. So even if your description doesn't match it, like I did this with John Gwynn, I remember In my head, his character Maquin was bald, and I said something about it on Twitter, and he's like, Maquin has hair, and I go, no, he doesn't. He goes, no, like on the yes, he does. And I'm like, no,
You know what?
not.
That's weird. I feel like I picture Maquin as bald too,
He
like a
ain't bald.
Viking, who's that? What's that game?
God of War.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
on the same wavelength.
That's
God of War.
exactly what
That's
I
who I
think of.
pictured.
Yes.
I don't know why that is. Weird.
Well, he's not bald.
He's not bald.
Isn't that hilarious?
He's my favorite character. Maquin.
Oh, dude, yeah, that's what we were talking about. Grizzled old vets, like the old wolf. I mean, that's
yeah,
Maquin.
exactly. That's probably what. Clearly, we have a preference for that. Yeah, Bautista, Jason Momoa, like I think they would all be good. Book voice. That actually is a great idea. Travis Baldry could be a part of it.
I may have just found my my new segment here. I might make a show, get some audiobook narrators on, put them through the ringer.
One thing, I was on a panel with Travis, and we had this idea that would be fun if like he could read, or you get a narrator to read like a famous author's like first draft, like they pull out of their chest that was like really shitty. I think that would be awesome. If anyone would do it, I would do it.
I mean, Sanderson did release. I mean, Sanderson released The Way of Kings Prime, which, you know, I know Sanderson fans, and they're like, it is terrible. I'm so glad this is not what he ended up writing.
No, I'm talking like even like the 12 books that an author wrote that never saw the light of day. That
yeah, some drawer books, I think, is what some people call them, right? You throw them in the drawer, you close them, they never come back out. Yeah. I think that's what King references the man, because Pet Sematary was supposed to be a drawer book, and then his wife was like, you should pull that back out and work on that. And you know,
smart lady,
worked out pretty well for him, I would say. Right. You know, that guy, he has a future, I think, as a writer, possibly. So we've talked a lot about your writing, and that was definitely something I want to pick your brain about. But I want to hear about you as a reader, and like, how did you come to love reading and storytelling? Like, what was it? Like, do you remember like what got you into even science fiction and fantasy back in the day?
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot. And, you know, if you go back far enough, your memory kind of gets muddled as far as like what your parents told you as far as stories, what's real and what's not. So I've come upon a few conclusions. And one is, I think, video. So I'm a younger brother. My older brother is 4 years.
That's why you did jujitsu. I see.
That's another reason. And I was always relegated for video games. So we would play a lot of games together, but especially for RPGs, you know, back in the day, we were playing Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, all the SNES, NES games. I was always relegated to the watcher role, where I would not be playing, and I was happy as a clam. I don't remember ever complaining for those games, just watching it. And the thing with those games is, and I still credit them for a lot of the storytelling, is that they're amazing stories, and they're like 300 hours of just like giant casts of characters. And I literally would just watch my brother play deep into the night and just be like immersed in these stories. We would never play to like gain the character's power. Like, you know, some people play those games to like so you fight the same guy over. We would just play through the story. And I just remember watching that. I think that really, really did heavily influence my storytelling. And I still talk about combat codes, and people talk about like, is it sci-fi, fantasy? There's a whole debate about like, you know, Orbit, of course, it's at the bookstore. If you go to Barnes & Noble, it's in the sci-fi section for most of them, although a few, I found it in the fantasy section. The debate continues. I call it science fantasy, but people are like, did you want it to be sci-fi or fantasy? I was like, I didn't even think about it when I wrote it. I was just, right. I think I'm influenced by games like Final Fantasy, where they're not constrained to a genre. So I'm kind of going off the rails here, but essentially I think my storytelling was heavily influenced by those early games, RPGs, JRPGs in specific. And then, you know, I was a very early sci-fi fantasy reader, again, picking up my brother's books that he was reading, like Dragonlance, Margaret Weis, Tracy Hickman, R.A. Salvatore, all the Drizzt books. And I would just like pick up the scraps. I'd be like, oh, he's reading that. I really want to wait till he's done. And I'd like bring it to school in like second or third grade and like leave. I would like skip class and go to the bathroom and just read it in like the bathroom stall. I actually told, one of my coolest moments is Ari Salvatore is also out of Boston, and I wrote him a letter, and he responded, and I told him that story, and he had me send combat codes, which is really
Wow.
a cool moment. Yeah.
That's awesome. That is a heartwarming story. Those are always the best. Yeah, so Final Fantasy. It's interesting just hearing all this because I got some Final Fantasy vibes from the combat codes. There's definitely some Final Fantasy in there. Would that be an accurate statement? Okay, I feel better.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen, Jimmy. Have you seen we did a trailer that was in the style of an like a old school 90s RPG for the combat. If you guys look up, if anyone looks up just like combat codes JRPG trailer, it should pop up on YouTube, and it's pretty cool. I must say. So it's developed with like pixel art, and it looks exactly like one of those old school games with the combat codes characters. It has like a battle scene with like jujitsu terminology and stuff.
I feel like I did see this, but I need to watch it again.
Yeah.
I do remember, and I hope this isn't a false memory, but I remember there being a Chocobo adjacent type deal.
Yeah. So if in front of this is the front of Griever's Blood. That's a Chocobo, Jimmy.
Yeah.
For any Final Fantasy fans, and we call them rocks. We call them rocks. They're like the Grievar Knights that cast. They can't use based on the combat codes. They can't use transportation or technology, and so they ride in this world like large flightless birds, which are called rocks. But if you play Final Fantasy, those are pretty much chocobos.
I didn't want to say it was a chocobo, just in case we have any copyright,
Yeah.
Any
I was like, I told Orbit, Orbit, guys, can we put a chocobo on the cover of the second book? And they're like, oh, let's see. And it actually turns out a bunch of the editorial team was a big Final Fantasy fan. So I got the go ahead. I was pretty pleased with that.
That is excellent. So was there ever any conversation about getting Felix to do these covers?
I did float it, but they wanted to go in a different direction. And I've heard this again. It kind of comes back to what I was talking about just going with people's expertise, taking criticism the right way. And this is like, especially as far as marketing books, this is their wheelhouse. And in particular, like, how do you market a book in a bookstore? Like, what catches someone walking? And you think about a lot of sales are online, but largely traditional publishing is still like about selling books in bookstores. That's like really where even now it's strange, it's still at. And so that's a big part of it. And they were, they had a very specific vision of creating like a symbolic kind of Hunger Games, Red Rising. If you look at a lot of those books that are almost like Red Rising, I would almost consider science fantasy too. Pierce Brown's books. They went a similar direction with like symbolic, again, Hunger Games kind of started the trend there. And I think that's what they were going for. And then also dragons are cool. So
dragon style. Tad Williams said, if you put a dragon on a cover, someone's going to buy it.
Right. And for those who don't know, there's not a dragon per se in my book, but there is some elements of dragon for those who've read it. It makes sense. It's not completely off base.
Wheel of Time-esque, I would say. There's dragon adjacent things and symbolism. So whenever you are going through the bookstore, do you ever just stop and see your book and are like, whoa?
Usually, to be honest, I'm going there to look for my book. I would love to say I'm just like...
It's the most vain thing I've heard today.
Oh, so vain.
I love it.
Come on, Jimmy. It's pretty cool. I'm like, I'm going to go to this bookstore and see if my book is there. So that's what it is. But let's see. I was on vacation with my family in Florida, and we went to the Barnes and Nobles there, and I guess I went to the section to look for my book, of course, and see if it was there. But I saw it there, and that was pretty cool because I didn't go to the bookstore to see my book. I went to the bookstore to go to the bookstore.
And then lo and behold, published, New York Times mentioned author. That was a big moment for you.
It's like, instead of New York Times best selling, it just cuts off New York Times mentioned.
They're only going to read the first 3 words.
Right. That's what I
2023.
figured.
No one's reading the whole headline. Don't worry about
No,
it.
that was a really cool surprise, and especially because I read the first, like, you'd think like, oh, they're covering a debut author. If they're gonna cover debut author, you'd think they give a good review. And then I read the first 2 reviews in the section. I was like, maybe not. Maybe not. And luckily, I mean, she really ended up loving the book, which was fantastic. And it was like a glowing review. I should probably have it like tattooed on me or something. But it's scared. I like had a heart attack. I was like, so is it a good thing if the New York Times pans my book? Like,
possibly. I mean, who knows?
yeah,
I mean,
I guess
know
they
people,
say, yeah, any press is good press, but
I do
it
think
would
so.
have hurt.
But it wasn't. It was glowing, and I was super excited to see that for you. And then I saw you post a picture of your parents seeing you in the New York
Oh
Times.
man, they were,
Very
and they're,
touching.
they're in their 70s, and they've been reading the New York Times for like a long time. So it was really cool that they thought, like, especially my mom. I mean, end of the day, like, self-publish is I love self-publishing, but like my mom was like, you're not really, until you're in the bookstores, you're not really, just that type of old school mentality. So
I get it.
that meant a lot.
I wasn't a real pro wrestler until I was on television, and then
Exactly.
I was on there for
You
like
can't
15
change.
seconds, and I'm like, there I am. I'm real now.
Right. You can't change your parents' minds. Just
Do,
gonna.
do your family like your books? Like you said, you had a brother. It sounds like he was a reader back in the
Yeah,
day. Maybe still is.
my brother did, which is really cool, and he was one of my beta readers, which is really cool. He gave me some good feedback, and more surprisingly, his sons, who were at that point like only about 10 years old and like pretty voracious readers, also loved it, and they've been like my 2 nephews, they've been super supportive, and it's made me think, because then they were passing it off to their friends. I'm like, yeah, there's like violence in this book, but I feel like the audience could get fairly young and still enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, there is violence in there, but I think you skirt
Like
around.
like I read some middle grade books with my daughter now. There's like dragons biting people's heads off, and it's like,
Oh,
there's,
yeah.
it's like, I feel like it's all marketing. As far as
Mhm.
what is adult sci-fi, what is YA, what is middle grade. I mean, yeah, there's obviously like trigger warnings and that sort of thing, but a lot of it is just marketing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of everything we've been kind of talking about, talking about getting traditionally published, getting in the bookstores. I was just watching a interview with Gene Wolfe from back in maybe mid 70s, possibly maybe the early 80s, and he was just talking about they kind of questioned him, the divide between science fiction and fantasy, and he was like, it's nonsense. He's like, it's literal
Right.
nonsense. He's like, I didn't sit down to go, well, am I going to write a sci-fi book or am I going to write a fantasy book? He's like, it's the same thing. And, he was one of the mentors to George R. R. Martin, who is also a big fan of like horror, sci-fi, fantasy are all rooms in the same house. So like they can come down and intermingle with one another. And a really good example of this, obviously, is the Combat Codes, Red Rising, Book of the New Sun. But dude, I read Sand Kings by George R. R. Martin last night. It's a 40-page.
I've never read it.
A lot of people haven't. So it won best novelette. I don't know what's the difference between novelette and a novella, but
Neither do I.
apparently there's a category at the Hugos, and he won the 1980 Hugo for this. And most people have not heard of it, but it is a science fiction short story, 40 pages, but it borders on the line of like horror, and it is so good. And
Oh
I was
man.
just sitting there and I'm like, why is there not more horror aspects in sci-fi? Like I
Right.
didn't realize it's something I craved. And it wasn't in the sense like I found the 3-body problem to be kind of horrific because of like the just the levity of the situation that is being presented. But this was different. I mean, this was genuinely like very creepy. And kind of crawly. There's like these little sand kings, are almost like ants, and like just imagining them crawling on you and so you're like, oh, this is wild. But it is still very much sci-fi. It's in a secondary
Right.
world,
And
secondary
just think
universe.
about how many books that are shelved in the horror that are definitely fantasy sci-fi. But yeah, it's all marketing. I understand, I come from a marketing background, and I understand the need to do that from like a business perspective, but I think people take it a little bit too seriously. And I to be honest, I think it constrains a lot of writers, new authors that are coming into it. They have to, they'd be like, am I going to write sci-fi or fantasy? I guess from a business perspective, but it's the same as like writing for trends. It's like just, or not, you know, you write what you're passionate about, it's going to come out well. Like I don't, unless you have a clear idea, you don't need to say this is fantasy, this is sci-fi. Like you could have elements that just make sense for the world you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Christopher Rocchio has done this in the Sun Eater series, which is, you know,
right. Sun Eater, Dune. I mean, how about Dune? Right.
That's a fan. I mean, let's just take a look back down, you know, memory lane. A lot of stuff was, you know, breaking that kind of wall between those two. I mean, Book of the New Sun is a fantastic example of that as well. So I think a lot of the stuff that ends up being remarkable are the ones that it's hard to put into a basket or a bucket.
Right. I actually think I'm watching the new Ahsoka series. I'm enjoying it a lot, and I realized I was trying to think, why am I enjoying this a lot? And it's the reason why I like Star Wars. It's like the reason I like Star Wars, I think, is because it's fantasy. It's like it like I'm a fantasy person at heart, and I think like Star Wars gives so much fantasy vibes off to me, and like even though it's you know in space, it's like you know there's mystical creatures and you know wizards and
anything can happen. It's all on the table, man. And that's that's what makes it fun. You know, it's part of that wonder of what else is out there and what else you're going to experience. Even in that 40-page story, I found myself being like, I would like to know more. I would like to know more about this, you know, and I don't think George is ever going to write again in that setting, unfortunately. But
yeah, he's got a lot on his plate.
Yeah, certainly. And someone did ask if I wished him a happy birthday. I did. It's on my community tab. I chose a very.
Oh, it's today?
It was 2 days ago. He has the same birthday as N.K. Jemisin, and then Stephen King's birthday was yesterday. So it's a big birthday week in fiction. And then I'm sure there's plenty of others that I don't know about. And yes, Michael Moorcock is definitely somebody else who does not care about the mold of fantasy, and someone I've recently got into that I'm very much enjoying. Are there any, you know, more, you know, not modern authors that you gravitate towards or that you were big fans of, or have you kept more in the current?
Yeah, you know, I'm heavily influenced by modern authors. Even a lot of my like fellow Orbit authors. Like I'm a massive fan of Fond du Lis. I really, really, really love Greenboat Saga. They got to make that into a TV series. Like I just think it would be so fucking cool to have that world. Like even Evan Winter, I'm a big fan of. Like
another jiu-jitsu guy.
Yeah, Evan Winter, Rage of Dragons. Yeah. He does jiu-jitsu too. How'd you know that?
He's rolled with Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo.
Yeah. He told me that. Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. Abercrombie, I'm a big fan of. Like a lot of the modern writers are. I mean, I like old school stuff too, but I like to try to keep kind of up to date.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of time to read now that you're writing? Is something that you fit in every day or every
No. It's not. It has to do more with having little kids. It's killed my reading. And I, you know, and it's kind of like a curse not having little kids. I shouldn't say that, but I hope my wife's not listening. What is a curse is now that I'm traditionally published and I get a bunch of arcs. I have like more books at my disposal than ever before, and I love books, and I love having the books. I love having the early versions, and I have no ability to read because I like lay down and try to read, and then I'm dead to the world in 5 minutes after that. But it's really cool that I'm getting so many books from fellow authors that that they're sending my way, and I get to read a lot of, or I get to try to read a lot of stuff. And I'm gonna chip away at that. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of understand, you know, I started a YouTube channel and I do multiple podcasts now, and I got a lot of stuff going on, and it's so much fun because you get involved in the community, but I'm like, oh, like all the time I need to read is also being used to create content around reading. And there are times where that kind of ebbs and flows, and I'm like, man, sometimes I wish I could just read, but I gotta film this video.
I did just read ML Wong. She's the author of Sword of Kaigen. Her new book. It's called Blood Over Brighthaven. It's really, really good, and it's those type of books. Like I was not able to go to sleep. The world of that, like that's a really good book. If you guys, I think it's out. I read an arc, but it's out now.
Mhm.
That is a great book by
Yeah.
Emma Wong. So if you're a
It
fan of Kaigen, and it's completely different than Kaigen. It has nothing to do with Kaigen, but she's just a master at character work and world creation. And she's another example of her worlds being she's not sci-fi fantasy. Like sort of Kaigen is like science fantasy. There's like modern technology, and
Yes.
there's yeah.
I love the restriction of technology in that world, where a group of people don't
Yeah.
have it because of culture and tradition and whatnot. Sword of Kaigen is one of my favorite books that I've
Yeah,
read.
guys, Blood Over Brighthaven, I think, has one of the best magic systems I've ever read. Like up there with like Rothfuss, Name of the Wind, like Sympathy or Allomancy, as we talked about before. It's a really cool magic system.
I've heard it's very similar to Full Metal Alchemist, which people are really big fans of. And
Yeah, it's like based on. She says it's based on like coding. Computer coding, and it's just so cool. I think I talked to her a little bit ago, and I don't know if she wrote this. Her dad is maybe a software engineer, and she kind of like talked to him a bunch about it.
very cool. That's one I would really like to get to. I'm hoping to get to it maybe early in the next year, because one of the things I really liked about Sword of Kaigen is that it was very reminiscent to Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is funny
Yeah,
because I've never watched that. I've watched like 2 episodes sparingly, but I always knew that I thought that the elemental magic was cool. You see it in the
right.
stories. What is it, like Fire Team? I'm actually going to watch it for the first time in its completion and make videos about it, I think, in the near future. But I knew that was based on it, and hearing about like Full Metal Alchemist vibes out of that, which I've enjoyed what I've read of that. I feel like, again, she's one of these people who are doing something just a little bit different that goes a long way with me when it comes to creativity.
Right, and with that book, who knows what if it would have been traditionally published if she had tried to do that. And again,
Yes,
another feather in the cap of self-pub authors. I think she's a great example of that.
definitely. Yeah, she is definitely doing her own thing, which I think is admirable for sure, especially because
Mhm.
she's had great success doing it as well. So, Kieran asks, Alex, have you read Robin Hobb?
Robin Hobb is one of those authors that I need to get to. I've heard so much great stuff about her, and it's just one that growing up, I just didn't end
Yeah,
up reading her, and I have to get the time to come back and read her.
yeah,
I've heard great things.
we all have those authors. You know what I mean? I've only read
Yeah.
one Gemmel book, which feels like a sin, and I didn't love it, which is another sin apparently. But we all have those authors. I would love for you to read Robin Hobb because I'm a big fan of hers. I think she is just fantastic when it comes to perspective and being able to use
Right,
that.
she's on every one of the top 10 lists. You see her name there, so she's
Yeah,
got to be doing something right. And I heard she's a good person too, which doesn't hurt.
she seems like a sweetheart. I've watched a
Yeah,
couple panels with her, and Brandon Sanderson said she's like the mom of fantasy. Like they'll go to
yeah,
cons
I like
together.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she seems very welcoming. Her
Right,
books
and
are
then you read her book, Diabolical
yeah,
Mama Fan.
it's so sad. It's so sad. Like, what did these characters do to you?
Yeah.
Like, why are you treating them like this? Oh man. Oh, Kieran says that he thinks Emma Wang was inspired by Robin Hobb. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean,
Hmm.
prominent female author in a very male dominated space in the 90s and has kind of made her own. I feel like, obviously she sold well when she came out, but she has had like almost a resurgence now that
Yeah,
it's
it's
all
been
out
really
there.
cool to see. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing is like, you have numbers of what's been sold for combat codes, and you have book 2 coming out. I think it's December 5th, if I have the date
Yep.
correct.
December
Yes.
5th.
So then we're gonna get book 3, and then it's gonna be out there. And it's just crazy to think, no matter what it does now, in 10 years, it just takes that, and then boom, you've
Right,
sold.
and that's very promising. I know we hear a lot about, and the combat codes has not done poorly, but it's done pretty well. But I think a lot of authors, especially debuts, they have so much pressure, and from everything you hear, like this is make or break for your career. If your first book doesn't sell, then you can't sell the second one. And I'm sure there's truth to every story, but then there's also all the counters to the story where you have authors that their first book was not a killer, or it's sold with a small press, or they were self-pub or whatever, and then they kind of grew their career, and it was kind of like journeyman
Hmm.
building their career up. So I think there's a lot of different ways again to do it, and I think as an aspiring author or an author that's starting out, if you like limit your your brain to one sector of the stories people are telling of how they became authors, it can be kind of debilitating and negative. And I just try to focus on the positive stories.
Yeah, and another thing that works in life. People's path to happiness and success in just general, I think, can look very different from somebody else. So I've always tried my very best to make my expectations non-existent almost, because if you have a certain idea of what something's going to look like, you know, who knows what it actually
Yeah.
will look like. I remember my wife asking me, like, was the wedding like you imagined it would be? And I said, I never imagined it. She's like, oh,
Yeah.
you never want to be married. I'm like, oh, I never said that. I never imagined it. I just knew it would happen as it would happen. There's, it's too many variables to consider. And
Right.
I think, having those expectations in check or non-existent, I think does lend to maybe an experience where you don't get disappointed, which can be such a killer for somebody that has a
Right.
lot of promise. So whether it's writing or life in general, I think it's just a good idea to
Right.
kind of
And just to be clear, I make all these mistakes. I make expectations for myself that are not fulfilled, and it makes me sad. And then I try to learn from it, and oftentimes I don't. And then I rinse and repeat. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not like sitting high on this mountaintop trying to like prescribe advice, because I'm like, people actually ask me about a lot about like, how do you manage like your family and your career and and writing, and I'm like, I don't like I don't it's crazy. Like, I often feel very imbalanced, and
Hmm.
I'm trying to work on that, and that's kind of just where I am. So
Yeah. I mean, I am definitely calling at all of you and prescribing. I am infallible. Kidding. Uh, I think everyone feels imbalanced to a certain degree, and it's working out for you though, man. I mean, you seem happy. You look great. I mean, you sent me the thumbnail, and I thought I was gonna have to retake a picture because I
oh,
was like, this
thanks, Jamie.
headshot. I mean, broad
Although you look,
shoulders.
your camera, I feel like I'm like under whatever light I am. I feel very red.
I'm wearing makeup right now. I actually no, I'm just kidding.
Okay, and you're wearing. I like your shirt. I very much like your shirt, Tatami.
It's actually
Shout out to Tatami Fightwear.
I highly recommend their clothing. I didn't realize how nice the clothing was. My favorite shirt to work out in. It's the best.
I had a gi. From them a while back, like one of the old school gis. I don't know if you remember, like they used to make these gis that were like the collars were so thick, like they
Yes.
were like illegal for competition, but they were like you'd never wear them out. Like I still have them.
I have a tatami one from probably about 7 years ago that I still wear to this day, and I might be
Yeah,
one of those ones because that collar is just so dense.
yeah. We're like, they don't make them like they used to back in my day.
They really don't,
They
though.
made martial arts uniforms.
I just got the new Hyperfly stuff, and it's garbage compared to their old stuff. I was very
Yeah, I
upset.
mean, some of the stuff you wear, I mean, it's just true with all clothing. It's just like I buy a t-shirt and it's just like I put it in the wash once and it's like completely falls apart.
Shrunk and torn
Yeah,
up. It's very frustrating, especially when it happens to geese, because that stuff is not cheap at all.
no,
Um,
it is not.
very expensive hobby. Uh, but about the books, there's something I wanted to, and I know it's Friday night, so I'm not going to keep you terribly long, but I
No,
do.
no, we're hanging. Whatever works, Jimmy.
It's our night out. It's boys' night out. That's
Yeah,
right.
I'm out here.
I'm out here. I love it. So you have book 2 coming out. Obviously, book 3 will follow. Have you given consideration to what comes next, and do you have
Yeah,
anything that you can tell us about that?
yeah. So my agent and I are currently we have something that we're I can't give details on the actual project, but we're pitching, for a next outside of the combat court, and I'm very excited about it. So I hope it works out. It's a project that I feel would really resonate, with both my current people that have read the combat codes, as well as like potentially new readers that are outside that wheelhouse.
Will I be happy as a martial artist?
Oh yes, yes, you certainly
Okay,
will be. Yes.
that's all I needed to know. That's what I like to hear. Ryan's asking if there's going to be the new, I assume, Broken Binding. Is that what this
Yeah.
is? Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but yeah, they're yeah, I'm it would be weird. I mean, I don't know if they do that, but like I'm so happy. The first run of Broken Binding sold out. So we will definitely want everyone, if they're putting together that collection, we want them to have that collection. That would be frustrating if they wouldn't be able to do that. I know that happens sometimes based on just business, but we're doing it. We're doing it.
Excellent. How did that all come about? Did they approach you, and were you surprised?
Those guys are fantastic. I've never actually met them in person. I've communicated with them. I know a lot of people have. Oh, nice. Thank you, Ryan, for picking up book 1. Yeah, book 2, you'll get it. And so there's some element where publishers have they have like parts of their team that communicate with all these external, like Broken Binding is one of a few special edition presses. I'm sure you've heard of a bunch. Some of them like are like Illumicrate and Fairy Loot, which are more like the monthly subscription ones. And those I don't, Comic Codes is not really that type of book. Like I know they cater towards a very specific audience. Broken Binding, I think, is really done an incredible job of like breaking new ground and seeing that there's a market there. And the fact that they've grown so fast and helped make special editions for so many authors and also tapped into like the self-pub. I think they're freaking killing it. Like those guys, Matt and Sean over there, shout out to them. I was so pumped to hear when they were going to take that on.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It definitely fills a space that people were willing to throw cash, and do these things. Like there's a market for it, which is really great to see people step up.
Right.
And I know
I actually think Wraithmark is doing a great job now on the US side. Broken Binding, of course, sells to the US, but like there's no like US equivalent. I mean, I know there's like book boxes of those big UK ones. I think Wraithmark is going in the right direction. Like the way they have a different model, of course, with like Kickstarters but like they're knocking it out of the park with like the Kaigen, that Kaigen special edition.
I'm
Man,
so mad I didn't get it.
I didn't get one, but that is a beautiful book. And I see they're doing the Legends lattes. So like I think people underestimate, whether it be US or UK, how much of a market there is for special editions and people that want to just like collect beautiful books of books they love. I think it's universal. Like it's expensive. It's expensive. There's no doubt about that. But it seems like there's a big market for that.
Oh, there definitely is. And I saw my friends posting their sort of Kaigen edition, and I thought I was being responsible when I passed on it. And now I'm like, you're an idiot.
Oh, me too, man.
Like, it's so good looking. Like,
yeah, I talked to ML Wong the other day, and I was like, "Oh, you think you could just extra one there?
Yeah, and slide it on over here." You'll return the favor. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right? That's how that works. Oh my God. Are you chomping at the bit to write this new thing, knowing that you've had so much experience now, and you're going to be coming at something I assume is kind of a fresh slate? Even I'm sure you've already worked on it, but like it's almost like it's like your first competition at Blue Belt. How about that? We'll say like that. You're like, I know all these.
I am, Jamie. I'm chomping at the bit for sure. I mean, like Combat Codes holds a very special place in my heart, and we have yet to. I mean, we still have to make sure book 3 is ready to go. Hopefully by the summer, because we're trying to do that schedule and keep it tight so people can really stay in the world. But at the same time, it's going to be nice, and I have been doing a bunch of writing, in the spaces between. So I have a bunch of, partials as well as manuscripts. But yeah, that it'll be nice to occupy a different world. But not to say that I would also love to come back to Combat Codes. I purposely will and have left enough for either prequels or sequels or anything in between. So, but right now it will be nice to be honest, to be in a different world for a little bit.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, maybe exhaustive sounds too negative, but I'm sure it is exhausting going from the self-pub trilogy, then having to revisit it, change things around, add things, and get back into it. You've done it twice. I mean, that is a tall task for anybody.
Yes, combat codes is a very familiar, I mean, understated in my household, combat codes and my circles. It's like, I need it. Should probably get I have been saying I'm going to get a tattoo. If you guys don't know, like there's the flux tattoos in the combat codes, which are like, yeah, it's my idea, but I still think it's really cool. Like tattoos that are moving on your body. And I'm like, I've been wanting to get like some iteration of the cover. I don't have any tattoos, and I've been saying I'm going to get it. I just haven't found, like, part of it is like you got to stop grappling for a little bit when you get a tattoo so it doesn't get infected. And that's been like, oh, do I really want to get off the mats for like a week or two, and then just finding the right artist but it's gonna happen some point. Just have to break the seal.
Yeah, I'm too fickle for tattoos, unfortunately. And then, there's so many Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire tattoos I wanted, but now you can't have one, and you'll have someone come up and be like, season 8 wasn't very good. And you're like, I know, dude. I read the books. Leave me alone. Okay. They didn't even
get in a spot where people can't see it, Jimmy.
Yeah, but then then I'm thinking like, what did I do it from? Like, am I gonna get on my hamstring and look at it in the mirror and be like, it's tight? You know what I mean? Like, I do look at my hamstrings quite often in the mirror, obviously.
Exactly. There you go. There you go.
So maybe when I'm doing the spot check for new muscles, I could throw in a.
That's another episode idea. Live tattoos. You got the audio narration, and now you got the live tattoos.
Could you imagine?
Fantasy, sci-fi specific. It has to be a sci-fi fantasy.
That would be a you just gave me a pretty cool idea. I'm gonna put that in my memory bank. I might use that later. But what I would do if I did a live tattoo show is I would have someone who's terrible at tattoos, so it'd be very funny for me, and they'd be like mortified. Like they want like Gandalf, and it just looks like he's melting. Like, that would be terrific.
I'll watch that one, Jimmy.
Oh, that would be terrific, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we're getting all
not for the
good ideas.
Contestants. That would be terrible, but they'll be fine. They'll be fine. Oh man, I remember you told me that some of the best advice you could give me was just like write every day, and it reminded me a lot of jiu-jitsu. It's like, your first year, you just need to show up. Like, you're gonna get smashed, and I think writing every day is similar to that in a lot of ways. I have a friend, Amanda, who has just been on the grind writing, and watching her go through it, because I don't write that often anymore, but watching her go through it does feel like watching someone learn jujitsu, and they're taking their lumps and their licks, but then they get good. You see them start to grasp the thing. And my friend Amanda is very good. Like, she's kind of like blossoming, this awesome writer. And I just have so much respect that you were able to do that, obviously in jiu-jitsu and get your black belt, but you also have done it in writing. Is there any advice you could give people watching who want to do this and struggle to write every day? Is there anything at all?
So I also want to say, I know I said that, and I think that is important. I think creating habits are important, but I also think it's important to give yourself a break, especially if you want this to be a fun thing, a passion thing for you, which really, in the end of the day, it should be, especially for a debut. You need to be kind of enjoying what you're doing to a certain extent. Not to say that there won't be a grind, not to say that just everything won't, go to shit, but at the same time, you need to be passionate about what you're writing about. So you also should give yourself a break. If there's a day you can't write, or if there's a few days you can't write and your life gets in the way, like, it never works to like guilt yourself. Like, you might think that works, but that's not a long-term strategy to like be too harsh on yourself. It's going to catch up to you. So I just want to give that disclaimer. But again, I think it needs to be treated like learning piano or a martial art or any skill. Like, I think it's weird that it's almost like people that don't write treat it differently. It's like everyone has a book that they could write, like as if you can just do it. But it's so silly. It's like, that's like saying that,
yes,
like I can go learn piano. Yeah, maybe I could. I mean, it would take a lot of time, but like, it would take a lot of practice to be a decent piano player. So I think you just need to have that knowledge in your head that you need to practice, and you need to put in the time, the mad hours, as we would say, Jimmy.
Yes, very much so. And sharpening that blade, for a good fantasy adjacent analogy. Yeah, definitely. And by the way, I do tell people all the time, like, there's these white belts that show up like 7 days a week, and I'm like, stop. Like you do 5. Do 5 because your
right.
next
They could burn. They're gonna burn out. They're gonna burn
yes.
out. Yeah.
That's my problem is that I just hyper fixate on things and then like just burn myself out on 'em. So the few things I stick to, like this, for instance, or jujitsu, like, okay, I really love those things. Where
Right.
with writing, whenever I was writing, I did love it, but I was like, I don't have the appropriate amount of time to dedicate to this to do it the way I want to do it. So I just haven't done it, which
Right.
is fine. Which is
Yeah.
fine.
No, it's you gotta. We're all I mean, like everyone's got their stuff they're dealing with, personal and career and everything else, and you gotta find the time. And if you really if you're ready and you want to do it, you'll make it happen. Just like
Yeah.
trust in yourself that you're gonna make it happen.
Yeah. Trusting in yourself is difficult, but great if you can accomplish
Right.
it.
Right. It is hard. It is hard.
It is. I appreciate all the advice you've given tonight for people. I just love having you here and knowing that you're still on that climb up. Like you've had great success, but I still think there's even better things to come for you. I can't wait
Thanks,
to see
Jimmy.
dude. I can't wait to see the HBO show of Combat Codes. Whenever we have Henry
Maybe
Cavill playing
maybe
Furry.
not HBO, but there could be no.
You heard it here first, folks.
We'll talk offline. No.
I love
Well,
it.
right now, to be honest, there's for good reason. There's a writer's strike, actor strike. I fully support it. We need that. But nothing is moving.
Yeah, it's all gridlocked. It is.
Yeah.
I've been telling people House of the Dragon's going to clean up because it's going to be the only show that comes out next year because it was kind of like in a weird space where
Timing.
yeah.
Right. Like I know some networks have gotten like waivers because they're abiding by the new contract. So there's going to be some shows, but yeah, hopefully things will get resolved in a good way for writers and for actors.
Yeah, and adaptations because we want to see them. We want to see them for our favorite stories.
Me too.
But yeah, man, I'm just so thankful, one, for you being here tonight, but I'm also thankful because when I found your books and we started talking, all those years ago, was during COVID, which was a tough time for everybody, obviously.
Oh, was that when it was during COVID?
Yeah.
Jeez.
It was a crazy time. And I said this in my review when I did the Combat Codes review. I wasn't able to be on the mats during COVID. And that was really, we kind of talked about it earlier, but like it is definitely a gateway to keep ourselves feeling not just physically healthy, but also mentally healthy. And you gave me a reprieve to get back on the mats mentally. And it genuinely was an uplifting experience because of that.
Thanks,
it made
man. That means a lot to me.
It meant a lot to me because that was something I was used to doing every day and I know people had far worse problems than that during COVID. So I'm not trying to, complain. I'm just saying that, for me and my experience, that was really touching to be reading proper jujitsu technique in a fantasy book. It was
right.
Just
well, Jimmy, you were the first one to put on a gi and do your review. I still talk about that. We're going to have to throw. How about if the show gets made, we're gonna run that one back. We'll both wear gis.
I'm so down. And if we did this like in 2 months when it's cold, I would definitely have worn a gi. But tonight it's about 90 degrees in this office. I'm getting a nice sweat on. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm sweating too here.
But man, sincerely though, thank you for the stories you've written. I enjoyed all 3. I can't wait to see what changes are in book 2 and 3. And then I'm really excited to see what you do next, because I know you're going to take this, you're going to apply it to your craft, and you're going to come back as maybe a brown belt, maybe even possibly for this.
Yeah, I can't skip. A purple is my favorite belt. Can't skip purple. You're a purple belt, right?
That's where I'm riding right now.
And the best. You stay in the purple. You don't have the pressure. I mean, you have the pressure, but you can just like play and you learn. I learned the most at purple. You play, you learn. You don't have the pressure.
I've been doing this for 7 years, and
round's hard.
I literally, for the first time, feel like I know what I'm really doing. Like I thought I knew what I was doing, but now at purple, I'm like, oh, like it's just like it all clicked, and you're like, this is why it takes so long to get.
Hey, we got to get you a Combat Codes rash guard. The purple. They have the ranked ones, level 3, purple.
I am so down. I will rock that, dude. I will rock that.
Yeah. We got to get you one of those.
I am so down. I will definitely post pictures on my Twitter, which is now like basically abandoned, but I will post them on my community tab here on YouTube too. People will love that.
All right. Yeah. Rash guards, they're not only for jiu-jitsu people, guys. You could wear them to work. It would be really weird, but that's okay. John Danaher, we all know he wears rash guards everywhere. You could be like him.
Do you think he's a serial killer?
Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
I do too.
Yeah,
no one knows what we're talking about right now, but I've been really thinking about it.
He's like this jiu-jitsu master who's like Master Splinter combined with Yoda, but he's like pretty much a serial killer. Like because he like doesn't have anything outside of jiu-jitsu. He like wears his rash guards to like weddings and he's serious about it. It's not an act. It's he's got bodies everywhere.
He's just sociopathic when he talks about things. Like it's just like it's the creepiest things, man. He's like, I found that punting people in the head while they're on the ground is the most effective way of disabling an opponent. And you're like, what?
Pretty good impression.
That wasn't bad, right? I talked a little too fast, and he would have used 3 Japanese words no one's ever heard of.
Yes. It's amazing. It's like as an author, like all these characters, like obviously I have views about people, but as an author, it's like it's just interesting. People are very interesting.
Will we get a Gordon Ryan adjacent character in your next series?
No.
Good. Man, it's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. I would love to do this again. Maybe when book 3 rolls out, we can kind of look and
that would be great. That sounds like a plan.
I think it'd be super fun. But before you depart, I would love for you to tell people where they can find you, connect with you, and where they can pre-order book 2 of the Combat Codes, which comes out on December 5th.
Find me physically here in person at my school here, Jimmy, or do you mean like in the onlines?
How about both?
Both. Anyone can come. If you're in the Boston area and you train jiu-jitsu, message me. We'll set something up if you're interested in it. And you, especially Jimmy, we gotta.
I need to make it up there.
I'm like Combat Codes for everything, which will be interesting if I start expanding outside of Combat Codes. Like, can I keep that handle? I kind of am very fond of it. So I'm Twitter and Instagram, and I'm even on TikTok, guys. Like, so I'm doing the TikTok and I like smash books together. Like I have 2 books and I smash them together, and you can look. Yeah.
You did have some good promotional material where you were pulling the book out of the gi, strangling people, making them read it.
Yes, I like force people to read my book by strangling them.
Yes, and I think there was an omoplata. I think.
Yes,
there, right?
There's a bunch of that. So yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time here on Friday. I do appreciate it, man.
I had a blast. This is a fun night out, Jimmy. Thank you.
Yeah, it felt like hanging out with an old friend, which is wild.
This has been awesome. This has been awesome, man.
Awesome. I'm glad you had a good time. And folks, we appreciate you being a part of the chat and offering up the questions, having feedback. All that stuff's great. And for, the thousands of people who are going to watch this after the fact, I thank you as well. Feel free to drop comments below. If you have any good questions, I could always forward them to Alexander and get his thoughts on them. And it helps out tremendously if you do the like and subscribe thing that YouTube loves, because people then can find this live stream after the fact. But go follow Alexander Darwin on all social media platforms, get the Combat Codes, and make sure to pre-order Grievar's Blood out on December 5th. And then we'll be anxiously awaiting summertime release for book 3, which should be excellent. But everyone, thank you so much for being here. And until we see you next time, be good, be safe. And remember to always keep turning the page.